Alright, for today's critical thought, we return to the topic of aesthetics versus graphics in game design. This was suggested a few days ago regarding a tweet over on Twitter that had to do with a professor discussing his disapproval of photorealism versus the abstract or unrealistic or fancy graphics when it comes to video games. And I think they use like screenshots from games like Calamari de Marseille, Parappa the Rapper, probably a few others. And this is a very interesting topic that goes hand in hand with the development of the game industry. Now, when it comes to game development and hardware specifications and growth, the industry made rapid evolutions during the mid 90s through to the early thousands. In our last talk about this, I brought up how I still remember buying my first Voodoo video card. I think this was for Quake 2. I don't even remember what year that was. It seems like it's been a lifetime ago. But over the course of the thousands, the game industry took rapid advances in terms of pushing out better graphics and more powerful hardware. And the growing competitions between video card developers such as Nvidia, AMD, Voodoo at the time, and so on helped to push things forward. The first video cards were incredibly expensive, just like any first wave or first generation technology. But over the course of the thousands and with competition blooming, it became a lot more affordable for consumers that actually dedicate their computer to having a separate video card. Again, before the old days, or before that happened, the motherboard was basically handling the graphics. And things, of course, did not look all that fancy. But what this meant for game development was the rapid evolution in terms of growing graphical powers of systems. And you can even see that in the course of the 90s. We went from 16-bit with the Super Nintendo to having the full 3D of systems like the Dreamcast, and then in the early thousands, the GameCube, Xbox, and the like. But this really shows how fast things evolved. And during the last decade, there was definitely a huge push towards photorealism. And again, photorealism, on the off chance you don't know what that we're talking about, is when a game can produce graphics that pretty much look like were actually there. And we have seen some games have gone that route, especially from the, I guess still we have to call them walking simulator genre, with games like What Remains of Edith Finch, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, and probably a few more other ones. Another major area where photorealism, wow, my mouth just completely ran with me there, where photorealism has taken root is in the AAA market, with games such as Gears of War, Call of Duty, and even stuff like Alien Isolation, Dead Space, and so on, that try to really get as close to realistic graphics or realism as possible. Now, while this sounds like a lofty goal, the last time we spoke about this, I said that the issue with striving for photorealism is that there is a set point. We can't go beyond photorealism when going for realistic graphics. There's only so many veins or so many details you can model of everyone's hands, arms, face, and so on. And technology has certainly improved. We've been seeing more in terms of facial recognition in games, animations, and again, just pure graphical powers of hardware. But again, there's only so much you can go forward. And from that Twitter post, and what a lot of people have spoken out against photorealism, is that because everyone is focusing on the same exact thing, it makes every game look very similar. I made this joke, I think, the last time, but if you showed people just random screenshots from the various Call of Duty games, not counting, of course, the science fiction or zombie modes, it will be very difficult to tell exactly what games these scenes are from. And this is another thing that a lot of people decry about when they talk about the AAA machine of boosting or boasting graphics over aesthetics. And the difference is when we talk about aesthetics, we are focusing on a game with a unique style. And when we say style, this can mean everything from pixel graphics, cel shaded, hand drawn, and for the artists out there, I'm sure there are many more. But the difference between a game that focuses on graphics or photorealism versus those that focus on aesthetics or the fantasy element is pretty much night and day. You can't confuse a game like Invisible Ink to Battlefield 1 or Cuphead to Metal Gear Solid. And this is where a lot of people really focus on when they talk about aesthetics versus graphics and why they prefer it. Because when we're focusing on aesthetics, we're not conforming to photorealism. It means you can create anything and everything that you want. Over the last year, for instance, I've played games like The Last Door, a game built entirely on pixelized graphics. Then we have something like Persona 5, which goes for this pop art kind of look to it. And again, stuff like Oxygen Not Included from Clay Entertainment, what we're seeing with Super Mario Odyssey, Mario plus Rabbids, and so on. The point is, why a lot of people like the focus on aesthetics is that it gives games more of a timeless feel to them. Because photorealism is very much limited based on the hardware at the time, it makes older examples of this look very dated. Again, we can go back to games like the original Metal Gear Solid or even Metal Gear Solid 2 and compare them to stuff like Uncharted, Grand Theft Auto 5, and so on, and it looks very much night and day. It really goes also back to the discussions regarding old 3D versus new 3D. And the thing is that 3D is very hard to do right. It's very easy to screw up with and create very weird looking characters, which, again, since I'm actually in 3D, it's kind of hard for me to make that example. But when you look at many older or first generation 3D titles, it does not look well, and it certainly hasn't aged well either. We can all talk about like Bubsy 3D. But when you focus on aesthetics and you're not conforming to a very specific look, you can get away with not having super realistic graphics. It's one of the things we've talked about before with the idea of the uncanny valley, and the phenomenon when someone tries to push something so realistic, but instead it comes out being unrealistic. And we could probably have like entire discussions about film with stuff like the Michael Bay Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so on. But that would certainly be way beyond the scope of our channel here. When it comes to video games, one of the few major examples of the AAA space would obviously be Nintendo. And Nintendo has always been a great example of aesthetics over graphics. When you look at a game like Super Mario Galaxy, or even something like Super Mario Sunshine, graphically it still holds up. Because we're not having to focus on how realistic Mario looks, or is this Piranha Plant in complete 4K HD? And again, this is why a lot of people want to focus on the aesthetic side and where that tweet came from. Because when you dedicate yourselves to a unique art style and aesthetics, it makes a game almost appear timeless. And you can't say the same about photorealism. Now, photorealism still looks amazing. There's no denying how impressive the graphics look in a game like Battlefield 1, Call of Duty, or even something like the Mass Effect series, that despite having aliens and, of course, science fiction, still tries to model their characters as realistic as possible. But for my money, and I'm sure for a lot of people watching this, I generally prefer the aesthetic side. But with that said, though, there are a few caveats. Focusing on a unified aesthetics requires a lot more work because of the obvious fact that you are creating something by scratch. You don't have a previous style or a previous example to, compare one to one. When I spoke with Zhang Ru of Kit Fox Games on the Shrouded Isle, he talked about how their artist was inspired by various animes and that kind of gothic look when they were coming up with the Shrouded Isle's unique art style. But again, it's not like you can just go to Google and pull something and then just copy and paste it. And this is why games that focus on a unified aesthetic always stand out, because you're never really going to find a game that looks exactly like that. And you can see that as a really good case in point with the works from Clay Entertainment. Despite having a very similar look with stuff like Don't Starve, Invisible Ink, and Oxygen Not Included, now of course mentioning their older games, they each look different enough that you can never confuse the two. Someone who looks at Invisible Ink will never say, oh, well that's Don't Starve, and vice versa. But as I said, it takes a lot to do this, and when you are focusing on a unique aesthetic, messing up can make the game look even worse than before. As we've said, or as we've talked about on previous discussions, especially with game designers, there is a vast difference between a unified and amazing pixel art or hand-drawn look versus something that looks very generic that doesn't look all that appealing. And for those of you who missed our talks, there is certainly an art when it comes to high-quality pixel art. Stuff like the Metal Slug series, what was it? Oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting it. Mercenary Kings, and again, I'm sure for those of you watching this, you can pick out your own examples. And to wrap things up, again, like I said, one of the games I'm really excited about is Cuphead, which is coming out next month, which goes completely with a hand-drawn aesthetic. And part of the reason why that game has taken so long, I bet, has been having to create that. But the bonuses of focusing again on aesthetics versus design or graphics is that when you pull it off, it just makes your game pop. Another really good example that I want to end on is Shovel Knight. When I've spoken with the guys from Yacht Club, there you go, I always forget their name for some reason, they talked about the amount of work that went into basically recreating that 2D pixel art from the 8-bit era, but still making it stand out and be all its own. And Shovel Knight is a 100% clear example of the power of aesthetics versus graphics. Yes, there are plenty of games that graphically are superior to Shovel Knight, but you will never confuse someone else's game for Shovel Knight. It just stands out and is all its own. Now, I know, again, that when I ask this, I think we know the answer, but for those of you watching this, do you prefer aesthetics versus raw graphical power? And besides the games that I mentioned here, can you think of other great examples of a strong, unified aesthetic when it comes to a video game? But thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on game design here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. And let me know if you have any suggestions for future topics. But until next time, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and come back nightly around 10 Eastern for regular game streams. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game design topics, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates from me throughout the day. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under GW Bycer for ways to not only support Game Wisdom, but you can get access to our Discord channel where we'll talk game design topics, as well as allow you to vote for our Saturday night grab bag stream. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the next video here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.